So let's go back to the earliest days of your recollection of your grandfather.
My grandfather's name was Charles Americus Feaga, and he lived at Pine Orchard, Ellicott City address off of Centennial Lane. He had a farm there.
And what was his farm for and about?
They had a small dairy operation and some grain.
And what time period was this, do you know?
Time period would have been, they bought the farm in 1914.
Did it have electricity?
As far as I know, they did. They had a ram and modern facilities in the big old brick house, which is still there.
And you think it may have had electricity, Charlie?
They had electricity. We did not at our farm when we bought the farm.
This is a different farm than your grandfather's farm?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. So then, just to help me out here, your grandfather gave birth to your father,
Yes.
and while your grandfather was on the same farm you just started talking about, your father was born.
Father was actually born in Frederick before. He was born in 2002, in 1902. And they moved there and bought that farm around 1914.
And where was this farm? Your
It's-
grandfather's?
It's in Ellicott City address, but it's on Centennial Lane, about 5 miles west of Ellicott City.
Okay. And
Off of 40, which is 144 now. There was no new 40 in those days. It's the old 40 it's 144 now. That was the old 41 into Ellicott City on into Catonsville, and that's how you got into Baltimore.
did I ask you the size of the farm?
That farm grandfather's farm was about 165 acres.
What was he doing on that farm?
Dairy, cows, and grain.
Multiple grains or just one special?
Pretty much barley and wheat. That was it. We didn't have soybeans in those days.
So your water, do you remember how your grandfather was getting water supply?
I'm sorry.
How he was getting his water supply?
Yeah, with a spring and a ram. They had a ram that was nicknamed that, called that, and it pumped water up to the top of the house. And they stored it in top of the house, and that's how they had natural pressure.
Was your grandfather's farm near Burley Manor?
Backed up to it. It was right beside it.
Now, was that south, east?
That would be west of Burley Manor, lying a little bit between what is presently Dorrigan Manor and Burley Manor. Burley Manor and Dorrigan Manor connected in back of my grandfather's farm.
So after a while, did your dad start working your grandfather's farm?
No, he bought our farm in 1932.
Your dad bought a separate
My
farm?
dad had a store in Ellicott City for about 4 or 5 years when he was very young, and then bought our farm where we live now, bought the farm in 1932, the year that I was born.
He never worked on your granddad's farm?
He helped. We helped down there. We went down and helped my grandfather also to somewhat, not a lot, but we happened to get more modern equipment, so we could take that down to the farm and use our equipment.
Do you remember the equipment your grandfather had?
No, it was an old horse-drawn binder and a little disc, a hower, spring-tooth hower, and some of that type of equipment that was really antique when the newer equipment came by. We had Alice Chalmers 1939 tractor, and when we got that, we went down and took over some of the work he had been doing.
Were you already born when you're describing this, or is this something you've heard from your dad?
No, I was born in 32, but I was 7 years old in 1939. Remember getting the tractor and remember helping my grandfather.
He must have been getting up in age then.
He died at 83.
That's quite a while. So it looks like there might have been a combination at some period in this between granddad, dad, and you working together?
No, actually, my grandfather gave up being active. He had another son, Herman Feaga, that when the war broke out in 1941, he my uncle took over the cattle part of the farm and still worked some with my dad. It was a large family. There were 8, and my grandfather had 8 children.
Where was he living on the farm?
In the main big home. It's a 3-story big old brick house,
Is it still around?
which is in perfect shape. Someone has put it back into great shape.
So you were of how many kids? You were one of how many brothers and sisters you have?
There were 5 of us,
5 of you.
3 boys
Where did you fit into that age group?
in the middle.
Okay.
Was the middle of the 5.
So Dad got his own farm.
Yes,
Granddad was still working his farm
yes.
to a point, and then in time, as he got older, he got out of operating his farm.
Another son that he had took over and was working that
One of
farm.
your dad's brothers,
Yes,
and kept it going.
yes.
So, interestingly enough, what was the opportunity as to why your dad didn't stay with your grandfather's farm but went on to his own farm?
Simply wasn't big enough. We expanded our operation, and it's a little bit sad, but in those days, a lot of people had 10, 15, 17 cows, and they called it being in the milk business. And actually, my dad expanded that a great deal when we came to the farm we are on now. And then I expanded a great deal. My dad had a stroke when he was 48 that took him. So I was still in high school, and I doubled the size of our herd almost immediately. And then we went on to rent a great deal of land. We rented 1,000 acres of land in Howard County.
Okay, let's go back a bit though. So here's Dad, and here's you coming up in age. Do you remember when you started getting drawn to working and actually helping your dad on the farm?
Yes, when I was 7 and 8 years old, we knew how to milk a cow. And even though we had machines, when you have a fairly large herd of cattle, you have 4 or 5 cows that only give a little bit of milk. You get them out of the way of the machines so you can speed along the rest of the milking. And we did that, and we stacked hay in the loft. It was loose hay then before we had bales. And we did start baling hay around 1946 and 47. There was a stationary baler. People were still blowing their straw on a hay stack, on a straw stack, until after the Second World War, and then pretty much used stationary balers. And then a little later in the 40s went to the balers that we could take out in the field.
Do you have some questions about it? If you do.
What was the most primitive implements you had on your farm? Did you have a hay loader?
We had a hay loader, but probably the hay rake, which looked like if you'd take all your fingers and put down on the ground and rake hay, and then it raised and made a windrow. We came along then with a hay loader and drove over that with a truck, and the hay loader on the back of the truck brought the hay up onto the truck loose.
So was that a hay tedder or a side delivery rake?
No, then we went to side delivery rake early on. The spring tooth rake was somewhat worthless and too slow. Went to side delivery rake in 1939, 1940.
You're not talking about a dump rake, are you?
No.
Okay.
No.
That is primitive.
Mm-hmm. And we did modernize pretty fast. We had milking machines in 1939.
39.
Let's just stick with this early period because I'm trying to get a sense of your relationship to your father and you learning farming then. Was your father actually what you quote would consider your mentor in learning farming then?
Yes, he just expected us to do that work. When we were 10 and 11, we did the work of a man. We had German prisoners a great deal during the Second World War. And I used those. We had 10 and 15 in groups. We were a little unusual because we didn't go down and pick up 1 or 2 or 3. It was usually 10 at a time or 15 at a time.
Who was managing them?
They sent a guard with them. With that number, they sent a guard. He generally went out on a hillside and went to sleep in the afternoon, and the prisoners once took his gun and hid it from him and gave him a little bit of heartache before they went back to Fort Meade. And we would go out in the field with, maybe pick 2 of them out and show them how to put the sheaves of wheat on, how to stack it, and what to do. And they were so good to we children.
Did that last a while?
Lasted for about 3 years. 1940, late 42, 43, and 44 are the 2 years when they were really used a lot on farms in Howard County.
When they were there, what did they do during the day for eating?
They always had the same lunch. They did early on with large groups like that. They had 2 slices of dry bread with a piece of what we would call Cracker Barrel cheese today, a little piece of that in the center of 2 pieces of dry bread, and a candy bar. And that was pretty hard for them to work on. My mom fried chicken, and we set a table, really a good table for them, and fed them very well. And on the way home in the evening, we had a place called Tony's Place down the road from us. They had the coldest beer around, and my dad would treat them all to a cold beer when they took them back down to where we had picked them up. The downside of that was when my dad pulled in with his truck in the morning to get prisoners, they all wanted to get on my dad's truck.
And at your home, when they ate there, what did your mother generally serve them? Iced tea, lemonade, something?
Usually iced tea and fried chicken. We would fry a good bit of chicken for them. And needless to say, they usually carried the sandwich back to the Fort Meade.
Forget that sandwich. So that was nice of your mom to do. What's the brothers, sisters breakdown? How many brothers did you have and how many sisters?
The oldest was a sister, a nun. She went into the convent early in her life. And then an older brother that ended up going to the Naval Academy and retired as a colonel in the Air Force. There was no Air Force Academy in those days. It was just Naval Academy or West Point.
So you had one, besides you had one other brother?
Then my brother younger than myself.
2 other brothers?
Yeah. Well, one younger brother, one older.
Okay. So when you were working on the farm with your dad, were all 3 of you working on the farm?
Yes.
So
For a very short period of time, though. My brother went on to the Naval Academy as soon as he graduated. I had not gone into the senior year when my dad had a stroke that took him. And then the younger brother was a year below me.
what year was that, do you remember?
Yes, he died in 1951.
So here comes this whole shock to the family, because that's extremely early. How did you all figure out what you were going to go and do with the farm?
We just did it. I had watched my dad. He was also a cattle dealer and a horse trader, I guess. Actually bought some riding stables in his lifetime. And so I learned to ride early and would go with him. And it wasn't really that much of a job to take over when I was in high school. I already knew his health was very bad. He found with asthma he couldn't come into the cow barn with the cattle very well. And I was already getting up at 4:30 in the morning. And I did that. It's from starting the 7th grade. I got up at 4:30 in the morning and spent a good while with the cattle before I went to high school. Before I went to school.
Your brothers were helping you too then?
The older brother was away at school then, and from there to the academy.
Okay, so he didn't have as much to do with the farm after your dad passed?
He did not help run the farm. No.
Okay. Did you and your younger brother, still have farm help, or did you?
We had some farm help. We found early on that if we bought a modern piece of equipment or a new type of equipment, we could do without the labor. And we went to the extreme on that probably. someone that I bought a good bit of equipment from, the Ramsburg brothers in those days, and David Mongley's up at Glenelg, used to kid me that I was going to buy a new piece of equipment every year. We found that we kept our equipment in very good shape, and we bought new tractors then. I bought a tractor in '51, another one in '52, and we kept on enlarging, but we could do without a lot of labor. Combines we did not buy. They were hugely, really expensive, and we found a couple different pieces of equipment. We could hire someone to come in and do the work for us. It kept me from hiring labor for that, and we did hire some people to do custom work.
How did you get the combine work? I mean, who did you select?
Someone by the name of Bobby Justice that I'd gone to high school with had a combine, and someone else had a baler before we did, and they brought the baler in, baled hay. Then we bought our first baler in 1951. It was an old John Deere baler with the bale coming out the side of the baler, probably the poorest baler that was ever built.
Did your dad ever have a thrashing crew come in for wheat?
Oh yes, the Ed Frank. Now that would be the older Ed Frank that he thrashed for us.
Who got that started? Ed come knocking on your door, or?
No, I think that they were scarce in those days, and when someone bought a thrashing machine, they went around and asked different ones, if I buy that thrashing machine, could I thrash for you? Which is typical sometimes of veterinarians even, going to places ahead of time. But the thrashing machine, before they bought it, they knew they were going to have 4 or 5 customers. And my dad and we called him Mr. Ed. Ed Frank were very close friends, very good friends.
So, did you help Ed Frank, or he had the whole
Oh no, we helped. We all chipped in, and sometimes neighbors traded help. I would go up to a place we called it Ridgely's, Washington Ridgely's farm on Philadelphia Road, and I would help the O'Donnells. I would help a few different places, and then they would send someone to help at thrashing time.
So that trading's a good idea. So you're, what I'm interested in was still focusing on the 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kind of experiences in there. So I'm sure somebody in your family wanted you to make sure you're getting an education as well. So you were sent to school?
Yeah, I talk about my brother that went to the Naval Academy. When he went there, we were rather proud of him, and he offered to quit and come home when my dad died. And I said, his name was Roy, I said, no, stay where you are. You're a better student than I am. You stay there and I'll stay with the farm. My mom did not want the responsibility of running a farm by herself. She worked hard with us, but she, not as far as management goes, that was turned over to me immediately.
You were the main manager of the farm?
Yes, and I had a younger brother that was a very good mechanic, and we worked together for a long time.
What are we going to call it? What's the name we're giving that younger brother?
Pete.
Pete. So it was you and Pete and Mom, essentially, after your dad passed away at 48, and you guys kept going with this whole farm operation for a number of years?
Yes, I did have a younger sister that went on to do her own thing as she finished high school and was not part of the workforce.
So how was it working with your mom and your brother, managing a 100-some acre farm?
Actually, 213 acres of our own, and we rented about 1,000 acres in our, as we grew. We rented land in Savage and Lisbon and Marysville.
How did you do that, though?
14 hours a day, 7 days a week.
How did you get the machines at these places?
Running them on the road. And that's partly why we brought things to a close as we did, because we didn't have the large equipment trucks that you could load this equipment on. And actually, Howard County's only been doing that the last 10, 15 years as far as hauling other equipment.
How did the idea come about to get all those other places and farm them? I mean, was there something you
We,
said?
we had a rather large dairy operation, and we needed more feed than we could grow on our own farm. But then we sold a good bit of grain. We sold, one year we sold 600 or 700 acres of corn. So it did take, that's when the combines, other people came in. My friend that had his died of a heart attack early on. And we reached out to Dave Munley's, Kenny Warfield, and other people, whoever could get there, to combine. We had 5 grain trucks at one time.
How did you reap the corn?
That was the combine big sheller that went in the field, shelled it, and shot it into trucks.
Combine?
The combines you see today, a little more modern now, but the same type of thing we had in the early 50s. We look today and look at some of the, and not to down the, I'm so glad they're doing the farm equipment, the antique equipment, but a lot of it was not productive. People lived on very little in those days, and it would be almost embarrassing today to say what a farmer made in those. We found early on that we needed to put in more cattle, and keep enlarging. When you stand still, you don't keep making money.
So the 3 of you, Pete, you and your mom, started, what'd you say, 4 or 5 other places? Marysville and...
Yeah, probably more than
Savage.
that, because we hit just 1,000 acres in one year.
Well, that's a pretty ambitious, I mean, a very ambitious undertaking.
It was.
A lot to manage and a lot to choreograph and keep going.
It's a lot of record keeping. Fertilizer we bought ahead of time in large amounts. And when I look back now and think of the deals that we made with people that we bought from, the fertilizer and even the equipment, it was a handshake. We didn't sign contracts. When I graduated from high school, I knew we had to change farming drastically real quick, and everyone has a godfather. Lee Ramsburg was probably a godfather to me. He said, you've got to modernize. You can't keep working the way you are up there. I said, we don't have the money to do it. He said, tell me what you need in the way of equipment. We had already bought a big truck from him, and said, tell me what you need in the way of equipment, we'll send it up there. I said, you're just trying to make some money off me. And he said, no, you're a good farmer. I've watched you with the dairy animals. When you get a check, send me a check. It took me about 7 years to pay him back. He never asked for any money, but I kept sending, and in the meantime, we bought a couple tractors from him, bought a baler and manure spreader, different things from him. And men like that trusted you in those days. They couldn't do that today.
Do you remember Lee Ramsburg's store before it was on Route 40?
Just barely. We bought feed there. But they called it an equipment place, but it was hardly any equipment there. It was a very small, until he moved out on 40, what is now 40. Then he enlarged.
Did it have a name?
John Deere equipment, I guess we call it. The Beacon Feed was the place that you're talking about on the other side of Ellicott City.
It was Continental Mill.
Yeah. Well, Continental Mill, but he sold Beacon Feed.
Yeah.
Continental Mill was a big mill. He just had a small place on this side.
And the reason that time with John Deere International, Clark and Owings was in Ellicott City, because that's where the railroad track was. That's how the equipment got to Howard County.
Many, 600, what was that figure we were using? 600 what? You had 600?
Oh, we sold 600 or 700 acres of corn in 1 year.
How did that get out to be finally, I got my check, I got my money? What was the process?
You stored it to the people that took your corn. You had the option of storing it and then taking a price that you gambled a little bit. If whatever it brought in January, February, or March, and you paid them 3 cents a bushel for storing it per month. And different people had different deals. We did very well with that. We were in a position by that time where we didn't have to have the money ahead of time, and we usually waited till January or February to actually sell that grain that was sitting in someone's mill. They still do that. That's the way most corn is sold today, most grain is.
When you didn't have the money ahead of time, you didn't have to, did you have to intimately work with the banks?
No, we did very little borrowing in my lifetime. I didn't buy a car until I had the cash to pay for it. And the way we got to some of the other equipment was dealers just good enough to say, pay me when you can. And,
So essentially they were the bank.
well, yeah, and no interest. And you do have to, and bragging just a little bit, you have to acquire a reputation to do that. And I never bought something that I couldn't pay for.
I'm interested in the, so I'm going to go past, well, let me just ask you this. This is more of a relaxing kind of question. So growing up, you're on the farm with your family, and on a Sunday, what was a typical Sunday like for you all?
Difficult Sunday was probably trying to get to Mass on a Sunday morning. And in those days, happened to be Catholic, in those days you fasted before you went to church and before you took communion. And I guess that it was 9 o'clock. We finished milking cows earlier than that, had time to take a bath, get your Sunday go to church clothes on real quick, and went to Mass, and then came home, and as soon as you had a great big breakfast, then you went back out to the barns or wherever because you were already behind schedule. So it was a busy day.
Did you have family over and have a big meal in the afternoon or anything like that?
No, we did that growing up some as little kids. I remember that. And after my father died, a personal story, I said, you're not going to do this anymore, Mom. We're going to have hamburgers on a Sunday evening, and you're not going to spend the day getting ready for company. And we found hamburgers was a ritual for us on a Sunday evening, had our own beef, and I respected the idea. I thought women had been working too hard in the house and too much of that type of thing. And I just said, no, you're not going to do that anymore. We're going to not have that big Sunday dinner.
But you did growing up.
Yes, we did growing
Who all
up.
came over when you were growing up?
If you had some relatives that would stop by or other, they were always welcome. It was a thing that people did in those days. But my dad kept us working hard enough that if you had something like that, you were back out of the house in a hurry. So I guess we weren't receptive to a large amount of company because of the work we were doing.
And where were you going to school?
A little parochial school called St. Louis in Clarksville. But then we went to Ellicott City High Public School. The two girls in our family went to Trinity, a private school. We three boys went to Ellicott City High School. That was before all the new schools came along in the county.
So that early school was a hop, skip, and a jump away, or what?
It's 7 miles from our house.
So you got there from...
There was a bus came by that we had to switch buses to get there, but we did it, and it was just expected.
So you were little, you came home from school, and you usually did what during the week when you got home from school?
I drank a big jar of chocolate milk and made a beeline for the barn.
Why?
To milk cows and to catch up with what needed to be done.
When did you get to do your homework?
I've often wondered. I really don't know. The side story is that we had a principal at Ellicott City High School by the name of Omar Jones. And when I took over the farm, I thought maybe I should quit because I missed 13 out of 14 of the first classes in the morning. And the principal came in and said, called me boy and said, boy, you're not going to quit school. You come when you can and go home when you have to. And we know where you are. In turn, I think I'm responsible for him becoming county executive in later years. I admired him. He was like a second dad to me. Never asked me any questions about where I was at school, except to park the big truck I had hauled cattle on further down the line from the other cars. He's a great guy. He was a second dad.
What's his name again?
Mr.
What was his name again?
Omar Jones.
Okay.
He's the first county executive in Howard County. We had commissioner of form of government before that, and then we went to charter of government, and he was our first county executive.
Did he remember you then?
Oh, yes. Went into his office, made an appointment, and again, he called me boy and said, you never make an appointment with me. You see that door, you walk through it any time you want to.
That's great. Did you have a garden on your farm, and did your mother can or preserve anything?
Very little. My dad said, if you have time to work the garden, you have time to milk a few more cows.
Did your mother milk cow?
Yes, she helped us. In earlier years, she helped, but in later years, she did not.
So it sounds like to me, somebody knew the efficiency of turning the cows and the milk over was a main source of keeping the farm going economically. Do you have any thoughts or experiences about that?
Yeah, I think that I don't know how you take vacations. It was a great place to raise my 7 kids. I don't regret that, but you don't get a chance to go to their ball games and some of the things that you would like to do. I've been lucky. They tell me that I taught them how to work, and all 7 are doing very well. But at the same time, I'm not sure I would tell someone else to do the same thing that I did over those years. And you better have good health.
Those 7 kids and you all lived in the same house?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Some of them had interest in learning farming from you?
None of them are farming. My advice to them was there's money to be made out in the real world without working this many hours. And if you can do it, do it. If you can't, then come back to farming. I have one son that has a very good little spread and good bit of equipment, but it's a hobby with him. He doesn't do that for a living. Another son that's up in Maine that has a farm up there, but he's a pilot and flies for a living.
So I'm going to think about what your life was like when you got out. Did you go to high school?
Yes, finished high school.
And so what was
Didn't have a choice. The principal made me.
I'm sure it all turned out to be a good thing for you. What did you do, and what was life like at the time you finished high school?
It was pretty tough. You allowed yourself an allowance when you got the milk check each month. You lived on a small amount of money as you could. And I guess I was lucky enough to marry a girl that had grown up on a dairy farm. And that probably made it a great deal easier. My father-in-law was very proud of what I was doing and gave me a lot of encouragement. And I felt very much at home with the huge family that I married into.
And your wife's first name?
Barbara.
So Barbara, you all met at a 4-H event or something, or how?
No, I actually took some girls Halloweening one night, and she was among them. She went to Trinity Preparatory School also. It was Barbara Warfield, one of the Warfields from the upper end of the county, and that was the start of that, I guess.
And you had a truck or car, and you could go back and forth?
Yes. And I guess Halloweening in those days is different than it was now. You took some chairs off the front of the porch while they were visiting, put them on the front porch, back porch, and it was pretty mild by today's shenanigans.
Very good.
But we had fun, and I think the people inside the house knew what we were doing.
Did you ever go over to her place and help with farming over there, or did you ever?
A little bit, not much. Her dad, she was the youngest of 10. So her dad was much older when I got to know him. He had a rather large orchard. A few times I went up and helped him with some apples or something that type of thing, but I didn't help him a whole lot. He was 13, 14 miles on up. We did rent the fields, some of his fields too, later years.
For your own farm?
Yes. Mhm.
Anything coming to your mind? Okay, look at my question board.
You're doing very well.
Okay.
Production in farming was a little different in those days. How you look at the amount of milk that people are producing today and the amount of grain. I talked about the Second World War. I still remember, and Mr. Ed Frank would support me if he were living, but I remember farmers bragging that they were getting 22 to 24 bushels of wheat per acre, or maybe 30 bushels of barley if they were very lucky. When I quit farming, we were getting 90 bushels of wheat per acre, and you're getting 100 bushels of barley now. The production is so much greater now than it was in those days. Those people that had like 12, 17 cows at the beginning of the Second World War, they were averaging, if they had 3 gallons a day average, they were doing good. It's just, we're doing 3 and 4 times the production now. We planted 12,000 stalks of corn in a field in 1945, 46, about 12,000 stalks. They're doing 32, 34,000 stalks in an acre now. You have a 43,560 feet in an acre, and in a couple of years you'll see them doing a stalk per square foot.
Yeah, it's very noticeable how close to the rows it became on the corn road.
Oh, absolutely. You used to be able to ride a horse between the rows. You can't do that today.
You had an opportunity to operate a lot of equipment over time, and you've seen the equipment change, of course, over time. And I'm trying to think, if you could go back to the earliest equipment operating, you probably, in your early kids, as being a kid, those were tractors then?
Yes, very few. We had 8 workhorses until 1945 or 46, and we shouldn't have. We should have had another tractor sooner.
Well, you didn't know that then.
Oh, I could still hook a team of horses up. It was my job to have the horses hooked up, fed, watered, walked at lunchtime, have them ready for the men to take back in the fields again. I did not do much of that. I probably was too young, but I knew how to harness the horses, put everything together, hook them up the wagon, have them ready to go, so when the men would not waste time doing that.
So you sound like you're a big proponent for getting out of horses and getting into the tractor.
Anything to do. My younger brother was really his likeness of farming was probably the equipment, the tractors. He did that. But even in more recent years, we had a tractor where you could set the number of stalks of corn, how the species that you wanted, how much you were putting on. But equipment is so fabulous today that I do sometimes have a desire. I would like to be able to go back and farm the way they're doing this year. It's just unbelievable what they can do with equipment now.
What was the first tractor you had?
39 Alice Chalmers tractor.
You had that when I was.
Yes. And going back, my dad probably should have had 2 of them and gotten rid of those horses that were doing nothing but eating and producing very little. I knew that when I was in grade school. I wondered why we were fooling with those horses. They shouldn't have been on the farm. We should have gotten rid of them, bought another tractor. We cut the tongue off the old binder that was used a lot in the 30s and early 40s. We cut the tongue off that, hooked a tractor to it. The rest, it didn't handle very well because we were going too fast then for it. But
Yeah, I don't know what the attachment was to the animals, but I remember when we had the Farm OB tractor, Dad kept the 2 horses and the 2 mules for quite a while, and they weren't doing anything.
It was a mistake that they all made in those days because they grew up with horses, and the horses were always there. Gas was kind of scarce during the Second World War. Although we could get it, it was rationed.
So Art's going to help me with this. The tractors that I've learned in the early days, the way the add-ons were put on, there was several ways. Like there was a belt, and there was a gear, and there's names for that.
Yeah, we had the belt pulleys that we made great use of. Even filling the silos, we hooked a belt to a machine at the bottom of the silo that blew the corn up into the silos. We used that belt quite a lot.
I think what Phil's trying to say is, when they were pulled by horses, all these implements, everything, that you had the tongue and you had the single trees, the double trees, the triple trees, and they pulled it. Then how did you adapt that thing to something a tractor would pull?
The first tractors didn't have continuous power takeoff, so they had no way to actually run that machine. And by 1940,
So what did you do?
you had to run it by the wheels themselves or put an engine on the balers. They had an engine, a Wisconsin engine, they set on the front of the baler, gasoline engine. You start that up and that ran the moving parts of the baler, as did the combines and some other equipment, the early ones. But then about 1946, 47, a couple of the tractors started coming out with continuous power takeoffs. By 1953, 54, they all had continuous, so you could use the tractor's power to run the equipment you were pulling. But until that time, you had to either use the wheel that was moving on the ground to make the motion or put an engine on the piece of equipment.
You know, basically what you had to do to adapt all these things to the tractor was to cut the tongue off and then put some kind of a metal plate on it. So
A hitch
it
and
catches the drawbar of the tractor, and then you were pulling it like all the horses were pulling it.
Yes, a steel
You had
hitch.
adapted everything on the farm to the tractor.
It was,
But that was before power takeoffs.
yeah.
The tractor had power takeoff, but it didn't power anything.
But so like you're describing how brilliant you saw that your dad should move from horses to tractors, how did you get him to move from the no power takeoff, adapted minus the tongue pieces of equipment, to the really
Newer tractors. You traded a tractor, and for instance, we bought a B John Deere in 1951, found it wouldn't handle, so we got what we called the New A in 1952, and then we went on to bigger tractors in a hurry. You just couldn't get enough production out of the small tractors, but they were better than horses.
Okay, so what was the transition and the advantage of using the power takeoff then?
The power takeoff is just a shaft that comes out of the back of the tractor that has a lot of power. The early problem was a clutch that you had to throw the tractor in and out of gear with. You threw that out also. And you had to make a real quick shift from one to the other to get the power takeoff to turn. And some tractor companies were well ahead of others. International probably was ahead of a couple other companies. But by the mid-50s, it turned around and went the other way.
That's exactly what Bill Powell said, that the little tractor we had, all you had to do was shove it in the clutch and pull the lever. We didn't have to get moving. It's interesting, he said the same thing you just said.
Yeah. Bill was a great neighbor. It was so good to see him today.
He was a neighbor when you guys were how young?
Bill's 3 years younger than I am. He was manager. He managed the DeRegan Manor farm, and his father managed it for a long number of years before that. And he decided to buy his own farm and go in business for himself.
So being again, I'm going to go back to this power takeoff thing, because the power takeoff, I mean, what Art was saying is the equipment ran itself, meaning its own wheels provided the forces necessary to make the pieces move. But so if you got the new tractor, which you did, and you got the power takeoff, how did you relate to all this equipment now? Do you think of it as like the horses, this is passé?
It was a little bit of a problem to make the old equipment fit the tractors. And people became expert at it, and word of mouth, one would talk to the other one and relate even to the length of the tongue that you needed, a little difference on than the horses, and speed of the equipment. Tractors wanted to go faster than the horses. Sometimes the equipment wouldn't handle or wasn't built for it. But they made that change all in a period of about 10 or 12 years.
And for you personally, who were they? Did you have people come in and do that, or you went to?
No, farmers did it themselves. Farmers become good mechanics, and they become pretty good veterinarians. I did our work, And my dad spent more on veterinarians when I was a little kid than I did on a large operation afterwards. I did all my own vet work pretty much and did a lot of neighbors.
And we're talking about needles and inoculations and,
No, delivering calves, milk fever, sickness, that type of thing. Vets were very good to give you some of the inoculations or the medicines you needed because they didn't want to work on the large animals. The pets came in, and the large animals were a little dangerous to work with. And there were a lot of vets that did not want to do the large animal work.
Did the vets trust you with the medicines and teach you how to inject for TB or anything?
Well,
They did themselves?
not TB, but for some of the other things, they were very quick to give you the medicines. They knew what you were using them for. I remember when a vet in the western part of the county had a heart attack and had to call emergency, and he said, call Charlie Feaga. He knows how. I'll leave the sutures here for him and the medicine. And I did a good bit of that for different ones in the county.
Now, did you keep these medicines in another?
And we had a refrigerator.
or in your-
No, we had a refrigerator at the barn.
At the barn?
Hmm. And it worked well. There was a gentleman by the name of Fred Kaiser that had a large operation down in the, where 29 and 40 is now, and had probably one of the largest dairy operations. And I did pregnancy tests for him on his cattle, but I learned a lot from him. He put in a large number of cattle. He would not have fooled with a garden. He would have thought that was worthless. Every time he had a chance, he put another 8 or 10 cows into his herd. Had a number of 10-gallon milk cans down there that you wouldn't believe, but he produced a lot of milk, and he made a lot of money.
And what kind of cows did he mostly have?
Holsteins,
And what did you mostly have?
Holsteins.
what happened to those Guernseys
In Jersey?
and Jerseys?
We once were offered a premium for our milk for a dairy that sold to schools. And they said if we put 20% Guernseys in our herd, they would give us such and such a price per 100 for milk for doing it. And I did it, and it took me about 2 or 3 years to get rid of those Guernseys. And the dairy was pleased with our operation, and they no longer requested that.
So,
Today, the schools would want the lower butter fat.
That's
milk.
right.
so because you have this wisdom in the medical care of the animals, what was the values that you would assess an animal and say that this animal is not serviceable anymore?
If they weren't eating, that's probably the first thing you notice. Calving is a major problem, still is for dairy operations. You've got to have some people are very good at taking a calf and some can't do it. And I never charged for it. I didn't do that much of it. I don't want to make out I was everyone's vet. But 4 or 5 people, I never charged anything. A couple of the vets told me that's why they call you. But I found something on the table on the porch the next day, a gift or that type of thing, and I made some good friends by doing that.
That's great. It is. Was there a local vet that would be considered all the farmers' vet of choice, or the vet that they would rely on besides you?
No, they could get me in a hurry. We had a neighbor that had about 100 head of Charolais cattle, and then Bob Kittleman further up off of 32, my father-in-law, a few different ones. I would, and they didn't call me that often. They called me when they couldn't get a vet or when a calf was coming, that type of thing.
Does Dr. Lewis ring a bell?
Oh yeah, Fred Lewis, he's about 88 years of age now. I think still does a little bit of work, but he became an expert on horses. And so I earlier spoke of people coming in to see if you would use something or use them ahead of time. Fred Lewis came in and pulled a stool up on our barn and talked to us before he ever came to the county and asked if we would use him if he came into the county. It was about the time our vet that we had was getting elderly and was finding it difficult to get out. And so, Fred Lewis did that with 4 or 5 people, I understand. Jimmy Clark, Moxley's different, but he made rounds and said, if I move into the area, would you use me? And they were smart. That was the thing to do.
You know, Dr. Fred Lewis speaks very highly of Howard County and its farmers.
He is just a great guy. Has 10 kids, a beautiful wife, and they're what everyone should look at in the way of a family and try to imitate.
We interviewed him last week.
Good, great. Cornell, he's an old Cornell guy.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
he did go to Cornell.
Yeah. And he did a lot of work with us. He quit doing, he just kept 2 farms and then went strictly to horses and small pets, small animals.
So, what are the best qualities you remember about your dad?
Probably working very, very hard. He's a little bit strict, maybe a little bit demanding. You had a hard time moving fast enough for him. And a no-nonsense person.
Now, you were on your farm, there was a dance hall. You want to describe the origin of that?
Yeah, actually, we bought the dance hall. We owned 3 sides in our 213 acres. We owned 3 sides of a piece of property that there was a cotillion that we called it a dance pavilion. And the hunt club in the western part of the county had some problems, so they came and bought that property, and none of them could come up with the money to pay their share of it. And my dad, the people that owned it, the stock in it, sold it to my dad. My dad bought it to put German prisoners in primarily. And politically, he was the, I've got to be careful how I say this, politically, he was wrong affiliation to get the prisoners. And I was small in those days, but I still remember 2 men coming in and talking to him one evening. We'd already measured for the barbed wire, the commodes, the types of things we needed in the building. And I said, we can't send those prisoners up. We're just found that you got to go down. I said, don't get excited. You can go down and change your affiliation, and you can get those prisoners. And I remember that. I am going to write a book. I've started a couple years ago, and we'll tell some of the real stories there. But some of the families are still living, and I don't want to do it. But he wasn't about to change his affiliation under those circumstances.
He didn't get the prisoners.
We didn't get the prisoners.
So now
So then they sent them from Fort Meade out to what we call the freezer locker plant. It's on St. John's Lane in 144 now. And we went there with our trucks to get them. One of the problems with getting the prisoners out to a place where they could stay is the bus people that owned the buses were getting $1 a day for a prisoner. We were paying them $1.80 a day. So it took $1 of their money for transportation. And in those days, that was a lot of money for the people that owned the buses. And that's what made it political.
So the pavilion then, did it have another use?
Yeah, we opened it up after the Second World War and ran dances there until about 1955.
So how long was that diversion?
About 9 years.
And so this was a weekend?
Every other Saturday night.
Every other, only Saturday nights?
Yes. And only in warm weather. It had a great big fireplace in it. But in November, December, January, and February, and March, you couldn't have dances there. It was an open air pavilion. You could let the sides down, put them back up again. And I ran those after my father passed away. I ran those for, the last dance was 1955. But you had to stay up all night because the dances were from 10 till 2 in the morning.
2 a.m.?
And they evidently, it was a group of, we called them would-be aristocrats, nice people, but they evening gowns had to be worn to get in the building, and the men had to have coats and ties, and a rather nice orchestra. and it was the place to be at that time.
Food and beverage?
They brought their own beverages. We furnished setups, chips, pretzels, and the mixers, but they brought their own beer and wine, whiskey.
What was a typical draw of people?
I think it was the hunt clubs, some of the hunt clubs from Montgomery County, out in the valley, and Baltimore County. We actually had more people coming to the dances from out of the county than in the county. They were a clique that had been together before the Second World War, and then they put themselves back together after the war was over, and it was a place there where they could come see each other. The building was rather beautiful inside with big timbers in it, but I found it very difficult to do that in farming as I was.
How many people would usually come on a Saturday night?
It held 100 couples. It was small. It only held 100 couples.
200.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you're still a farmer and you're managing a dance hall.
Yeah, I guess so.
And you're trying to get to church on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And he's up till 2 or 3.
People that brag they can do on 5 hours, it can be done, but it's not the thing to do. It's not the thing to do.
In hindsight.
In hindsight,
Not that Saturday night when it was time to clean up and everybody left and you still got work to do.
I think in my life there's a certain challenge there. I wasn't the only one working hard like that. I had friends that were doing the same thing. So you expected to do it. You didn't feel sorry for yourself. It was expected of you. You just did it.
So these were friends you swapped stories about farm life, those kind of friends, or they were just the friends that were interested in the dance hall aspect?
No, they were only friends that came to those dances, and they were men that could afford some expensive horses to ride. They rode in hunt clubs, that type of thing, and I put together a committee of some of them to sit on a committee for it, and they were very nice dances, and
Was that contemporary style music then? The style of music?
no, it was the popular music that you would hear at that time.
So it was
Like big-
Four-leaf clover, I remember that, and
Like big band,
yeah,
that
Yeah.
sort of
very good.
orchestra.
Yeah, they were orchestras that.
Less than a mile down the road from you, it was Brendel's Manor Park. What do you remember about that?
Not as much as I probably should. I remember the crowds coming in and out of there, and occasionally a lot of noise there. Brundle's Park, up on top of the hill, they had the Happy Johnny days. I don't know if you remember that or not,
Yes,
but
I do.
and then Snow's Park, we called it Snow's Park there, was rather big. And then another saloon and another one, Sloopner's, Brady's, Brangles,
Blackburn.
Blackburns. Yeah, we had a lot going on there.
Did you ever hear any stories about the Mayfield two-room schoolhouse down at Folly Quarter Road?
Vaguely. We called her Aunt Lillian O'Donnell, taught there. She was my godmother, and she taught there. That's where she met Uncle Will O'Donnell when he took milk out and put on the stands right there in front of the schoolhouse. They had to take the milk out to the end of Folly Quarter Road for the truck to pick it up, and he met her there.
You could almost walk back to the home
Yeah,
to Folly Quarter.
but she taught there. I don't know for how long, but that's when it was I don't remember it being a one-room schoolhouse.
It was two.
Mm-hmm.
Two-room schoolhouse.
There were 2 rooms in
I
the,
mean, that's what
in the one room. Okay.
my uncles, my dad went there.
Okay.
When they lived at Burley Manor, they would walk out to the road. Old Annapolis Road used to go to the Reagan Manor entrance straight on out. And they walked out Manor Lane down to the Mayfield School.
I knew that only from stories I've heard, but there was never a school there when I was growing up.
In its final days, it got taken over by termites. Remember, it was covered up with this blue tarp.
Yeah.
They fumigated it. They couldn't knock the building down until they got the termites out. Killed them. was that way for, I guess, a year, covered up.
But Howard County's been a great place to grow up in, and it's sad when you think there were 50 farms, at least 50 farms where Columbia is now. It's about 14,000 acres in Columbia.
Yeah, we interviewed a gentleman who used to live there, Al Bassler.
Oh, yeah. You all have interviewed a lot of people then.
I'm afraid so.
Al goes back a long ways. Al is somewhere around 87, 88, do you know?
He's 88.
Yeah.
Fred Lewis is turned 88. Groundhog's Day.
Did you, I'm trying to figure out about,
Did we ask him what he did on the farm? Like, you had bicycles, bows and arrows, cat pistols, or anything?
No,
oh,
my dad taught us early on how to use a gun, a shotgun and a rifle. And we never had time for pleasure, or playing around, I guess you would call it. I remember a dog that was attacked by other, we had roving dogs in those days. It was not unusual to see a pack of dogs running, and they tore a dog up that we had. We used him for cattle and for work there, and we was like one of the family, and he gave me the rifle, a .22 rifle, and said, as soon as you get up in the morning, you walk those ditches. We have to get rid of those dogs. There were 7, and I got all 7. But you couldn't do that today.
what about any other injuries on the farm? Do you remember any stories or experiences of other injuries on the farm?
No, not really. I talked about German prisoners earlier on. In those days, you fed the stalks in, chopped them, and blew them into the top of the silo. It was my job to guide the pipe and stomp the silage to try to get as much in as we could. And it was wooden silo, and the top and the pipe shooting the silage down caved in a little bit and came down over top of me. And a German prisoner climbed a couple of them tried to come up the chute in a hurry. I guess they thought I was covered up. Came up to see if it was okay, and one of them took his corn knife, was in such a hurry and so frantic to get to me that he carried the corn knife with him, and he hit it into a wall of a chute of the silo to come in after me. I was okay. I don't know, everything had come down around me, and as I crawled out, the knife he had stuck in the wall, I still have a scar today on my finger. I cut my finger halfway in two. Climbing out, he felt so bad about it. He went up to the house with me, and my mom wrapped it up and went back to work the rest of the day.
Do you remember your brother Pete inhaling poison ivy smoke?
That was me.
That was you. I thought Pete said it was you.
No. It was taking the bark off of posts that we were going to plant, locust posts. And I didn't take poison oak. I'd show the men working how I could pull it up, and it didn't bother me, but I inhaled the smoke. I burned it all day. No, that was me.
Did it affect you physically?
No, got over it. I guess a day later I was doing this, but not burning.
Poison oak and nobody else could. How come you could pull the poison oak up?
Some people don't get poison oak. I've known people that don't.
Put that in your health manual. Some people get it. Some people
No, I could pull it up and pull it off of things. I just didn't take poison oak.
Well,
It's the same with some people allergic to bees and some people weren't allergic to bees.
I have a brother that, that was very serious. This brother you're talking about is allergic to bees, and we had him in an ambulance 4 different times to the hospital, and doctor got in the ambulance once with him. Yeah, he carries a needle and a pill to put under his tongue. But yeah, Pete's very, very allergic to bees. Wasn't until he was late 20s. So I don't know how that works. But we had other run-of-the-mill accidents, but we're very lucky. We all the equipment we were around and what we did, and probably wouldn't do some of it over again. You look back, and I started making them use hard hats for the filling silos when no one else was doing it, and they thought it was a joke. I made them wear hard hats. So you just do some of those things.
So, Charlie, can you contrast the old days of farming to today's farming day? See a comparativeness there?
Yeah, I think today would be dreadfully hard for someone to, did what you told me not to do.
You know what, you could actually, yeah, you figured it out.
There we go.
Hang on a second. We'll wait till Art gets back. You all right over there?
Yes, it's off.
Okay, so you started to tell me,
Wait a minute, I'm not on.
oh,
Is it, everything all right?
yeah, he's good. He's just, it's gonna sit in his lap. That's what it is. He's fine. I hear you. You hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
So you started to compare then and now. Go ahead.
It would be dreadfully hard today to do what we did in those days because it takes such a huge amount of capital to get into farming. And I'm not sure parents would do that for the kids today. It just happened in those days. One farmer took over if you were already farming. But if someone finished high school today and they were a good student, and they'd have to be, with as tough as farming's become, they would find it hard to come by the capital to invest in something that would be profitable. I don't know where we go from here. You almost have to be born into a farming operation. And even with the magazines we read, Progressive Farmer and all the magazines we get, most of the people, 99 times out of 100, they're sons of farmers or they have some reason for farming background.
Could it be any help to move to the Midwest? Is anything any better out there?
Land has become very expensive now in the Midwest. 20 years ago, it was not. Now, the land in some of those areas is bringing big prices. Illinois is finding people in Chicago, the billionaires and millionaires there. Some of them, especially a number of years ago when things turned a little sour, they found it was safe to put, and I'm going to the extreme, but if they were worth $15 or $20 million, they found it was smart to put 8 or 10 million in farmland. It wasn't going to make them a lot of money, but it was always there. And if you hold it long enough, it will come back. And that's true all over the Midwest pretty much now. Land is no longer cheap like it was. Just 20 years has changed things so much in those areas. Land there is bringing $6,000 to $10,000 an acre. And you can't make money out of that, especially, but it's an investment. And they're finding people in America that think land might be the safe place to put part of their money.
And that's not going to be in Howard County.
No, it's pretty tough time. Land preservation has made land in Howard County fairly expensive. We're paying more now than some of the farms would bring for development.
You seem to be pretty knowledgeable about the Midwest. I'm just curious, as a side question, are you talking about the Midwest above Tornado Alley, or are you talking about the Midwest County and all the Tornado Alley?
Probably above it from, Iowa to Illinois. Kansas is getting pretty expensive. And if you go into the South some, Alabama and Mississippi are getting money for land now that they didn't 20 years ago. And it's partly because our country we have a lot of billionaires now in our country. And we used to know all 10, 15 of them or so. Now we have hundreds of them. And a lot of these people are really investing in those areas.
How does a farmer deal with the fact that a tornado just came to their farm and wiped out practically everything? I mean, I'm just curious as to, this is just an odd question.
They go broke and no one hears of them again. They do. They go under. And it's a little bit, you can compare that with some other businesses. I don't know what the up-to-date figures are, but the hardware business, for instance, in the United States, about 8 out of 10 go broke. The other 2 make a lot of money. You either make it or don't make it. The same is true with restaurants. We have, in Howard County, we have about 270 liquor licenses or so. And they're always coming in, going out, selling, but you only hear the ones that really make it. But a restaurant either makes a lot of money or it goes broke. There doesn't seem to be in between. Same's true with hardware. And we don't like to say that, but the same is true with farming. We don't hear about the ones that never made it.
Did your grandfather leave an impression on you as to his personality? If you describe, could you describe to me what you saw?
No, my grandfather was probably not a good farmer. He was a musician. He could play the piano. He led the Frederick Band for 30 years. He played at McKinley's inauguration, was chosen as the top band at that time. He was very good at that type of thing, but probably not a real good farmer. He did not understand that you had to modernize. He didn't have the money to modernize, and but he was just a great individual, laid back, maybe too much, but one of the kindest people you'd ever meet.
Are you on a farm now?
No, I kept 7 acres of 213.
And who got the 230?
It's developed.
Okay.
The thing that we need to stress, and I will quote a Newt Gingrich on this, a number of years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, Newt Gingrich was giving a speech, said, "What is killing the farms in America? What is done were to take away farms and take farms away from productivity is the death tax. The state tax should not be there. It is done more to destroy farmland than development or anything else you can think of." Our farm would still be a farm if we did not have an estate. We had a tax to come up with on that. In 1951, I talked about getting out of high school. I had things fixed so that we were thinking about selling because things were pretty tough then. And I had the rest of the family put something in order that my mom had a life estate as long as she was living. We could never sell that farm. When she died in 1987, we found we owed an estate tax. I said, "No, we don't. We don't." She wasn't part of the farming. And it said, 3 lawyers met with me, and I said, we're not going to take any money for advice we're going to give you, but we won't challenge the IRS like you'd like. Said, because she had a life estate, effectively she had never really let go of that farm. And we were shook. And this has happened not just to us, but those types of stories are out there everywhere. There's a King farm in Montgomery County a number of years ago that owed so much money the farm wasn't worth what they owed in taxes. And that made headlines across America. But the state, there should be no such thing as a death tax. You work all your life for your kids, and to leave something and you pay taxes every year, you shouldn't have to pay taxes again. So it's left me a little bit bitter. Mom never knew that. She died in 1987, and we found out in settling things, someone said, "Well, I said, "No, we don't." And I said, "In effect," and that's what they said, "We won't fight the IRS because we don't want to take your money. We'd lose."
What are you doing today, Charlie?
Not playing golf. Golf is a sissy game. It's a game that if you can do anything else, you wouldn't do it. But as you get older, I was always rather athletic. I played a little bit of ball. Always thought it was, and at 60 years of age, I decided to take up the game of golf. I'll never get good at it, but I love the game.
Are you on any kind of boards today, active in anything?
Behind the lines, I still politically maybe offer unwanted advice here or there with someone's chair. I'm on the liquor board now, and I don't know why. We have a Tuesday nights, a night that I have a couple hours off.
So you're still a decision maker?
Well, if you call it that, but that's why I knew how many liquor licenses, about 270 of them in the county. It's hard.
Who talked you into that?
The council each appoints someone, And I think there was a need on there for someone that maybe knew the county a little better than the others and didn't come on the board angry. Give them if they have a good excuse, sometimes there's a reason for a business doing what they're doing, or they need another couple months to settle on a place to take it over. I guess the business part of it interests me. And there's a lot of that.
During the years of raising your kids, you were still farming?
Yes.
So then at some point you got out of farming?
Yeah, I guess around 1995 to 2000, we had the last hay probably there, 2000. So I've been out of it for over 15 years.
And the decision was to do what then?
Well, I was on the council in Howard County at that time. I served 14 years as council member.
Oh,
So
for you.
that kept me pretty busy.
Okay. So you stayed with that after the
Yeah, yeah.
closing down of the
Yeah,
last of the
yeah.
hay there? I see. I don't know what else to ask Charlie. He's so experienced.
Were you part of or instrumental with these little circles that are in traffic?
Yeah, actually, the one in Lisbon, they nicknamed that, I can't use the language that a lady that owned a store up there nicknamed it, the so-and-so Figgy Roundabout. But the state had $90,000. They were going to experiment with a roundabout. And I couldn't do it for $90,000 now, but that was a few years ago, the one in Lisbon. They said they wouldn't put it there if the local politician didn't want it. So I had to appoint a committee to study it. Everything's got to have a study. And 6 of the 7 wanted it. So yeah, the one right in Lisbon, I had them bring a ladder truck from Columbia up there when they roughed it in to make sure a ladder truck could still, and I wasn't satisfied with that, so I called Gene Mullings and asked him to bring a tractor trailer, the biggest one he had out there, and go around a circle. We followed him around a circle, a lot of giggling and laughing about it, but he was able to make it around, and that's the first circle. But I'm glad they don't use the nickname for it anymore, but people did.
We'll bring it back.
Well, traffic comes through there now. The most you would get would be a fender bender. No one's killed there anymore. And that's true with almost all roundabouts. They have fender benders, but people don't get killed. You don't see them hitting that circle 55 mile an hour. And I'm very much in favor. I got a little credit for the safety thing there because I did introduce the first helmet law in America. That was done here in Howard County. And it took me bicycle helmets. And they claim that that's what followed at Annapolis then when that passed in the county, that the motorcycle helmet thing got a little bit of a kickstart because of what I had done here. I introduced it because there were 3 people killed in 1 year with bicycles. And one of them was right out here at West Friendship. But I talked to the police and 2 of those died of head injuries. The 3rd one would have been killed anyway. But I used that to introduce the bicycle helmet bill. And I didn't know that they didn't have the bills anywhere else. I didn't know that was the first one in America. And we even got calls then from Tokyo and some other places wanting to know how we did that, what we required, and could we send them a copy of the bill. So that was I think 1989.
Who knows how many lives you saved?
Well, it made me feel good because a couple of police officers, right after it passed, there was an accident in Columbia. One of them witnessed it and said the kid would have been dead if he flipped out and then landed on his head. But anyway, it was being such a conservative, they couldn't understand why I would introduce a bill to make people wear helmets. But it's something that now when I see a helmet somewhere, yeah, it rings a bell a little bit. I say, they've got a helmet on.
Right. Yeah, even the police on bicycles in the county.
Yeah,
were
yeah.
wearing helmets.
Yeah, they wouldn't have done that before 1989. But it took some kidding about it. I had to introduce it twice. I couldn't get the number of votes. The next year I followed up and got enough votes.
Was this while you were on the council?
Yes. Mhm.
Oh, so some of them were with you on the council, and some of them weren't.
Yeah, it was 3-2 vote against had to introduce it again and got a 3-2 in favor.
I guess I don't have to guess which side you were on.
Well,
When the vote was cast.
they gave me an award some doctors did for an association in the state a few years ago. And someone said, why did it take Charlie so long? We looked up the records and how he introduced that. And they were talking to a county executive, former county, and said, why did you object? So he was the wrong affiliation for it. We weren't going to let him have that. So that happens.
Political.
Yeah, it happens in everything.
That happened in your earlier life too.
It did. And it probably, you never forget that one. That did hit me at that time. I thought we need a two-party system. We need it badly, and we do. You can't have a one party. I don't care how you're affiliated. You need one side watching the other side.
Good, good. Do you have any other questions for him?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Listen to all my old boring stories.
No. Only two of them were still boring. The rest are incredibly exciting.